Chapter 6 Port Safety. Annie banged on the wooden door. A moment later, it opened. Gunner? A man said, peering into the snowstorm. No, Annie shouted. The ice cracked and my brother fell through. His feet are soaking wet. Can you help us? Hurry, get inside, the man said. With Annie's help, Jack limped into the warm, firelit cabin. He took off his mittens and wiped snow and ice from his glasses. Sit near the stove, the man commanded. I'll heat some water. Annie helped Jack out of his parka, and he sat on a wooden chair near a crackling wood stove. Take off his boots, the man said. Annie helped Jack pull off his fur boots and wool socks, then set them near the stove. The man grabbed a kettle from the top of the wood stove and poured water into a bucket. Jack looked at his wet feet. They were white and numb from the cold. He couldn't move his toes. How are they? The man said, lugging the bucket to Jack. Not bad, Jack said. He was still trembling from the cold. Not good, said the man, looking at Jack's feet. He set the bucket down in front of Jack. Soak them a while. Thanks, said Jack. As he put his feet into the warm water, he was overcome with pain. He started to pull them out, but the man stopped him. Keep 'em there, kid, he said. Okay, said Jack, gritting his teeth, listening to the howling wind and the snow pelting the cabin windows. He worried about the huskies. Can we bring our dog team inside? He asked. Sure, I'll unhitch them from their harnesses. You stay here and soak your feet, the man said. Then he threw on a parka and hurried outside to get the dogs. I'll help him, Annie said to Jack. Don't move. And she followed the man back into the storm. As Jack sat alone in the one-room cabin and soaked his feet, he worried about the time. He looked around for a clock but didn't see one. How long would it take for his boots to dry, he wondered. Would his feet be okay? Did the dogs have frostbite too? Jack was glad when the door opened. Everyone in, Annie shouted. Hauling the sack of dried fish with her, she led the huskies inside. The man followed the team into the cabin and slammed the door against the storm. Go, sit, he ordered the dogs. He pointed to a dry straw spread over the floor. The bedraggled huskies took slow steps across the room and settled down in the straw. Feel any better? The man asked Jack. Yes, said Jack. His teeth had stopped chattering, and the pain in his feet had lessened. I'm Jack. She's my sister, Annie. I know. She told me, said the man. I'm Ed. He grabbed the kettle and poured a little more steamy water into the bucket. Ed's a musher, too, said Annie. His team is in a shed behind the cabin. He's a mailman, like Okie's uncle. He recognized their dogs. Cool, said Jack. Yup, said Ed. Keep soaking your feet while your sister and I take care of the dogs. Jack kept his feet in the bucket as Ed poured drinking water into a large pot and gave it to the team. Then Ed and Annie knelt in the straw and massaged the dog's feet, one paw at a time. The huskies panted and looked as if they were smiling. Good dogs, Annie kept saying. That's right, good dogs, Ed chimed in. Jack saw that the musher was missing teeth and his beard was scraggly. Even so, his face had dignity and strength, Jack thought. Now that he understood the job of a professional musher, he admired Ed a lot. Ed lives here at the Port Safety Roadhouse, Annie said. That's a good name for it, huh? Jack nodded. As the wind howled outside, it did feel safe inside the cabin. But he worried that they couldn't stay. They had only 12 hours of magic. Do you know what time it is? He asked. Hold on. Ed pulled out a pocket watch. Almost midnight, he said. So almost 8.5 hours left to find Gunner Cosson and return to Nome, thought Jack. Suddenly, he remembered something. Ed, why did you call us Gunner when you opened the door? Did you mean Gunner Cosson? Asked Annie. Were you expecting him? Jack kept his feet in the bucket as Ed poured drinking water into a large pot for the huskies. I did mean Gunner Cosson, said Ed. Earlier today I was told to wait for him. If he gets tired on his journey, I'm supposed to take his package on to Nome. But then I got word from Solomon that Gunner would be staying there a while. When I heard a knock, I thought he decided to push on. No, said Annie. The mayor of Nome told him to wait until the storm ends. At least that's what someone told us. Good thing, said Ed. Only a crazy fool would drive in a storm like this. So why the heck were you two out there? Well, we just went out for a short ride said Annie. To exercise Oakie's uncle's dog, said Jack, while Oakie's at the hospital. Right, said Annie, and then we got lost. You're lucky you found this place before you froze to death, said Ed. Yeah, real lucky, said Jack. How are your feet? Ed asked him. Jack pulled his feet out of the water. His skin was pink and the terrible pain was gone. He wiggled his toes. I think they're going to be okay, he said. Good news, said Ed. He grabbed a towel and a pair of socks from an old canvas bag and tossed them to Jack. These socks will be too big, but better big socks than wet ones. Thanks, said Jack, drying his feet, then pulling on the warm, woolly socks. You just dodged a case of frostbite, mister, said Ed. I bet you kids will think twice before taking a joy ride in a blizzard again. Well, actually, I think we should be heading home soon, said Jack, but don't worry, it's not far. What? Are you two crazy in this weather? Said Ed. Well, we're champion mushers, Annie said in a small voice. Oh yeah? Ed squinted at her. What races have you won? Well, they weren't in Alaska, Annie said. We won the Frog Creek Winter Relay and never heard of it, said Ed. Doesn't matter. I don't care who you are. You're not going back out in that storm. Your team needs to rest, if nothing else, and eat, right, fellas? Ed grabbed the burlap sack and pulled out flat pieces of dried pink fish. The huskies wiggled and whined as Ed started feeding them. Annie looked at Jack. Maybe we can stay a little bit longer, she said under her breath. Jack nodded. Okay, but we have to keep our eye on the time. We will, said Annie. The dogs gobbled up every piece of fish and drank from bowls of water. Then the huskies sat down, put back their heads, and began to howl. The wind howled outside as the all 8 dogs howled inside. Jack knew the howling meant the dogs were satisfied. He, Annie, and Ed laughed until the howling stopped as abruptly as it began. The dogs then began nodding happily off to sleep, one by one. Some lay on their sides, while others curled up in tight balls and covered their noses with their bushy tails. All right, now let's get you some food and drink, said Ed. Can you please tell us what time it is again? Asked Jack. Ed glanced at his watch. 1:15, he said. Jack didn't know what to do. He was hungry, but now they only had 7 hours left to find Gunner and get back to Nome. I'll make some soup, said Ed. He seemed determined to keep them from going back out into the blizzard. He grabbed a can of tomato soup from a shelf and began opening it with a can opener. What about our mission? Jack wondered. How could he make Ed understand that they had to leave? Excuse me, he said. I'm afraid you can wash your hands over there, Ed interrupted. He pointed toward a tin basin on the washstand. It's okay, Annie whispered to Jack. We have time. She put her red, chapped hands into the cool water and washed them with soap. Jack reluctantly did the same. Ed nodded a little toward the table. Sit, he said, as if giving a command to two huskies. Jack and Annie smiled. They dried their hands and sat on two wooden barrels at the table. Ed dropped a box of soda crackers between them and gave them each a glass of milk. While the blizzard raged outside, he filled two bowls with steamy soup from a pot on the stove and put them in front of Jack and Annie. Then he sat in an old armchair near the table. Thanks, Ed, said Annie. Yeah, thanks, said Jack, sighing. Breathing in the delicious smell of the tomato soup, his worries momentarily faded.